And then Chris, would you please email the link to Dan? He exited before clicking the link.
You're on, Grandmaster. You're on, Grandmaster.
All right, brethren, I apologize for the delay. We were trying a new tool this evening that did not work out so well. So we've gone back to using the technology that we have been. I appreciate you staying with us. And I look forward to what I think is going to be a very informative evening. Let me start out by giving everyone a quick update. The first thing I'd like to say, brethren, is we all know with this pandemic, it in of itself has created quite a problem worldwide. But in particular, this has resulted in a very turbulent time for a number of brethren here in the state of New Hampshire. I would ask that you please keep in your thoughts and prayers those brethren who are in sickness or distress. And unfortunately, the list is too long to mention, but suffices to say that there are job changes that have been impacted, there are sicknesses that have been impacted, and there have been life changes that have been impacted. All these coming together to present some real roadblocks to brethren during this time. So I would ask, please, that you keep them in your thoughts and prayers. And if you're aware of any of these brethren, if you could help in any way possible, I would appreciate that. I do have some good news. I want to give you a quick update on our Masonic reentry plan here in the state of New Hampshire. So as you know, back in the June timeframe, we started by allowing face-to-face stated communications and special communications. And then shortly thereafter, we then allowed inspections and rehearsals to take place. That was followed by July 1st. You were then able to schedule lodge visitations. And then in mid-July, I then allowed you to once again hold meals and collations in your lodge. Now, all of these things are done under the caveat that we maintain conformity with the laws and guidelines set forth by our federal, state, and local authorities, as well as those of the CDC. What I'm very pleased to announce this evening is that once again, we'll be able to start conducting degrees. I want to thank our Grand Lecturer and Deputy Grand Lecturer for putting together a plan that I have shared with the line officers, and we're all in agreement that we have a plan that is very workable. So long as you conform with the guidelines, I think everything is going to be just fine. So it's my intent to work with the Grand Lodge office to send that notice out tomorrow that effectively says that you will be able to start performing degrees as of August 1st. So right around the corner. That's really terrific news. The last, one more item that I wanted to mention. It was brought to my attention, how do we handle the issue of balloting? As you know, as a part of our balloting process, you're physically putting your hand into a ballot box, which is filled with various items. And so the question is, how do you prevent cross-contamination? So this is the procedure that we will adopt. To avoid potential exposure to the virus through the use of the ballot box, all members present will wear disposable nitrite gloves during balloting and will discard them immediately following the casting of the ballot. During the inspection of the ballot, the senior deacon will sanitize the ballot box before and after inspection of the ballot by the junior warden, the senior warden, and the worshipful master. So I think this is a procedure that should work well. It's something that we didn't cover in our initial communication. So I appreciate the brethren that brought this before me, and I think we've got a viable solution. One more thing that I want to mention to you, brethren, is that I have been counseled by members of our medical staff. And as you know, as Grand Master, there's a fair amount of travel involved in my day-to-day responsibilities. And so what I'm going to be doing, at least on a temporary basis, is when I visit your lodge, I will be received as Grand Master. I would like to get right to the work of the order, and that I will respectfully request that I be excused. What I have been told is that one of the elements of this virus is the amount of time that you're exposed to it. So if I am going into a room or a building, I'm really going to attempt to limit the amount of time that I'm going to be there. I'm going to try not to be sitting in a room for a 2-hour program. So please don't anyone be offended if you see me arrive, perform a program, and then leave before the end of the program. No disrespect intended. It's simply to ensure the safety and security of all involved. That also involves, in the past, I've brought along my entire Grand Line, along with my Grand Marshal, perhaps my Grand Sword Bearer. And I think what you're going to be finding over time is that few of us will be joining in the future, just to make sure that we're limiting the amount of exposure that we have to this virus. So that's a quick update from me. I appreciate very much you joining. Once again, I apologize for the bit of a technical hiccup that we had in the beginning. Hopefully you've stayed with us, and you're now going to hear from a series of excellent speakers. So I'm going to turn it back over to our host, Right Worshipful Brother Dan Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Most Worshipful. I apologize for joining a little bit late. So, brethren, this evening we're going to hear from Right Worshipful Brother Collins, Right Worshipful Brother Patuan, Right Worshipful Brother Sprague, and Right Worshipful Brother Olson. We have a great program lined up for you, and it gives me a great deal of pleasure right now to introduce to you our Deputy Grand Master, Right Worshipful David Collins, who is going to talk a little bit about Charity Fund Drive update, as well as a license plate program update. Right Worshipful.
Thank you, Right Worshipful Hotchkiss. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening, brethren. On behalf of the Grand Lodge, the first thing I want to do, as many of you are aware, you've seen those letters go out in the Charity Fund Drive. And the first thing I want to say, brethren, is to those of you that have been able to give so far, thank you very much. The message you heard loud and clear was this. The Grand Master knows that many of you have been impacted financially by this COVID crisis, and we certainly didn't want you to take undue burden on that and contribute to the Charity Fund Drive. However, there were brethren that were not so impacted by it, and they have been giving very generously. The Charity Fund Drive is about 5 weeks in right now, and as of last week, we actually had nearly 500 brethren giving with a gross amount of about $25,000. So it's a wonderful amount. You say, how does that compare to previously? Right now, we're running about a month ahead as far as our gross amount of money we've received. But brethren, I don't want you to stop there. For those brethren, the 500 members that have given, that's still just around 10% of the brethren in the lodges that have given to that. That's still a small amount. So again, I appeal to you, brethren, for those of you that are able to give simply $5, please send that into the Grand Lodge. If you're not, understood, my brothers. And you know, the big thing we always talk about is, where does this money go? My brothers, as you see at this time, we have been helping in the last many months. We've been helping brethren that are having some financial challenges and difficult times. We've been helping lodges because, again, a lot of lodges were impacted because they put on breakfasts or yard sales or functions during the spring and summer months where they would normally be raising money to support their lodge. The Grand Master generously put forth a financial assistance campaign this year where he is actually assisting lodges. We've already assisted many lodges in that. So, brethren, I'm asking your appeal to help and consider giving if you are able to. And again, if you're not, I certainly understand, as well as I'm sure the Grand Master does. But I want to thank you to those who give, and please give as generous as you can, because these funds go right back into things like the Grand Lodge Scholarship Funds, where we help our youth. We have certainly doing things with charitable giving that we do. Matching funds, brethren, is another major thing that we help lodges for. We help double up your donations that you're giving to your charitable efforts as well to make an impact on them. But ultimately, brethren, what are we really doing with the charitable giving? We're actually helping our brethren for the future. because that's what we're here to do, my brothers. The only reason we actually have a charity fund that we can give today is because brethren from 10, 50, 100 years ago were giving some amounts of money to the Grand Lodge for the Grand Lodge to be able to help all those lodges and brethren, and certainly those organizations out there around the state. So I encourage you to please give if you're able to. With that, brethren, I thank you. The other thing I want to take a moment to speak about tonight is the license plate program. You heard the Grand Master speak about this, and you've heard some information come out of the Grand Lodge on this. We actually had two brothers who are state representatives, Brother Sherm Packard and Brother Ken Weiler, who sponsored a bill in the New Hampshire legislature this year to have a special decal plate with the Masonic square compasses on it. And I was pleased to actually attend a House of Representatives, New Hampshire House of Representatives subcommittee hearing where they actually heard about that bill. The subcommittee was very much for that bill, and the bill actually proceeded relatively quickly through the House and was approved by the House. However, brethren, if any of you watch what's going on in the state legislature over the last many months, there was a lot of political wrangling going on, and a lot of bills got kind of left this year. Ours got dropped with that. When it went to what they call crossover and went to the Senate chose to take our bill with many, many other bills and do what they call lay them on the table. And when they lay a bill on the table, brethren, if you're not aware, that essentially kills the bill for this session. However, my brethren, we are not dissuaded by this. We know that certainly there's been a lot of challenges this year that have been going on in the legislature. And I know those two brethren are looking forward to sponsoring the bill next year. There is a lot of support. So you're aware the special decal program was a state that was that was put together by the New Hampshire State DMV. And what they wanted to do was allow nonprofits, essentially from A to Z, if they would like to have specialized plates. These are not vanity plates. These are a special decal plate. And again, it's something that I believe there's already many nonprofits approved. I think we simply just got caught into the legislature during the COVID crisis, but I certainly look forward to doing that again. However, that bill is ended for this year. So what you can do, brethren, is if you're friends with a state representative, if you're friends with a state senator, maybe it's a good opportunity the next time you see them to ask them that, next year you'd like to see the Masons of New Hampshire have that special decal plate, and you'd really appreciate them sponsoring it. So for this year, brethren, this bill is essentially died in committee. But again, we're going to take it up next year. And we hope that by next summer and through the winter, as the COVID crisis is over, the legislature get back to work next year. And we hope to be able to have those special decal license plates available for brethren of New Hampshire Masonic lodges at that time. With that, I will turn the program back over to Right Worshipful Brother Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Right Worshipful Collins. Definitely appreciate your update regarding those two wonderful programs. Now, brethren, we're going to hear from Right Worshipful Brother Troy Patuan, who's going to give us a little discussion regarding planned giving. Right Worshipful Patuan.
Thank you, Right Worshipful. Good evening, brethren. So what is planned giving? Well, in a nutshell, it's basically an opportunity for Freemasons to practice charity. The basic idea of it is contemplating and considering leaving a lasting gift to the Masonic charity or charities of your choice once you've laid down your working tools. So your next question might be, who should I allocate my gift to? Good question. There are several choices you can pick from. A few of them are not limited to are the Grand Lodge Endowment, the Charity Fund Drive, your lodge, New Hampshire Masonicare, Rainbow and DeMolay, and the scholarships that we provide for them. You may regard your lodge. However, you might be worried, well, I'd like to, but I haven't shown up at lodge in years, and I wonder if that idea would be beneficial. Your Blue Lodge is sort of a catch-all, really, for your community, and your lodge contributes to the betterment of your community on a regular basis, hopefully. By leaving a gift to your lodge, youth organizations, our special ladies, its facilities, etc., they benefit from your generosity. In a way, even though you have laid your working tools down and being initiated in the Celestial Lodge above, your charity is still having an effect on things you care about. Your legacy as a Freemason still lives on, provides future generations of Masons to continue that work, which in turn, hopefully, betters your community. So now, hopefully you're saying, okay, that sounds great. How do I do all this? Glad you asked. There is a form that Grand Lodge has, which is easy to obtain, that needs only be filled out by you, signed in the presence of 2 witnesses, and filed with your personal belongings. That easy. Now, you probably have some questions on the particulars, and I assure you that more information will be available to you in the future Chelsea boards from your lodge, and information will be also provided by this Grand Lodge come fall. Thank you for listening, brethren, and for considering plan giving.
Thank you, Right Worshipful Patuan. Appreciate that update and that nice summary regarding plan giving. And brethren, our YouTube chat is open and available. So if you have questions or comments, please forward them appropriately, and we will get them to the appropriate individual to answer the question for you. And now, brethren, I would like to introduce Right Worshipful Brother Larry Sprague, who's going to talk to us about an initiative that he started regarding a new Masonic passport. Right Worshipful.
Thank you, Right Worshipful Brother Hotchkiss. Brethren, you heard me talk about this a while ago. The office was working hard on it, and then all of a sudden we weren't allowed to have meetings anymore because of the COVID crisis. So this kind of got put on the back burner. But I'm happy to say that the New Hampshire Masonic Passport, I had the first one right here in my hands, is ready to be printed. The cover, it simply says the Ancient and Honorable Fraternity of Free and Accepted Masons of the State of New Hampshire Masonic Passport, and it has the seal of the Grand Lodge. It's about 4 1/4 inches by 5 3/4, so it will easily fit inside the inside pocket of your suit coat or tux jacket, whichever. The inside cover has your Masonic record where you took your 3 degrees. It has a welcome note. And then you get to the inside where there's the tasks that you have to complete. And there's a total of 32 tasks in there, ranging from witnessing degrees to visiting other lodges and other districts, district events like the DDGL's inspection, the DDGM's visitation, a seminar or educational thing put on by the DDGEOs, lodges of instructions, table lodge, St. John's Sunday, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of that, every time you complete one of these tasks, you get it signed by the secretary or the master or a Grand Lodge officer, whichever the case may be. And upon the completion of this, you will be recognized at the next annual, semi-annual meeting of Grand Lodge, just like the newly raised Master Masons are. The Grand Master will call you all up. They have the Grand Marshal bring you up. He will, you will receive a framed certificate saying you have completed the New Hampshire Masonic Passport. The back page, the inside back page rather, has a spot where you can record your Masonic credentials, any offices you held in your lodge, any memberships in other bodies or other lodges, honors and awards. Maybe the goal of this is for you to hang on to this. And you write down if you ever receive a past master's jewel or a Major General John Sullivan Distinguished Service Award. And the purpose of this, brethren, is to get Masons involved. It goes back to one of the Grand Master's pillars of retention. The hope is that you will take this with you wherever you go, get it validated at all the events you see and witness and participate in. And it'll take you approximately a year if you try hard to get it completed. But at the end of that year, we, as basically our lodges, not Grand Lodge, but your individual blue lodges, will have a newly raised Master Mason who has been dedicated, devoted, traveling, and interested in for a year. And hopefully he stays that way, which will help your lodge in the long run. And in the long run, benefit Grand Lodge, because we have involved, engaged brethren taking an active part. And every time you see these guys, you will have new friends everywhere you meet. So with that, if there's no questions, I will turn it back over to Right Worshipful Brother Dan Hotchkiss. Thank you.
Thank you, Right Worshipful, and greatly appreciate all your time and effort you placed into creating that document. It's going to be a wonderful tool for our brethren to utilize.
Thank you.
And brethren, before we have, we turn it over to our educational program for this evening, I do have a question for the Grand Master from Right Worshipful Brother Earl Cole. What are the guidelines for meals?
So my brother Cole, thank you so much for your question. There was an announcement that came out, and it was effective on July 15th, pertaining to all that is associated with the serving of meals. There's quite a bit of detail here. I'm sorry, July 15th. I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail because it's about 2 pages long. But in effect, what it does is it makes sure that we are complying with the same rules that any restaurant or place that is serving food here in the state of New Hampshire would also have to live by. So naturally, the servers are going to have to wear disposable gloves, masks. They should be the only ones that are dealing with the food, serving of food or any beverages. So if you're doing a buffet, the people that are in line should not be touching the food in any way. If you have servers that are providing food at the table, it should not be community like a basket of rolls. Everything will be served to you individually. So I would encourage you to go and look at the full details of the guidelines that were distributed. But safest to say, I firmly believe that what we do within the 4 walls of our large room are critically important. But I also understand that it's equally important whether you do a collation before or after your lodge meeting. That's where an awful lot of good masonry takes place too. This is something that I really wanted to bring back to make sure that brethren feel that sense of fellowship. So I'm very, very pleased to say that as of July 15th, this is something that's allowed again. Thank you, Right Worshipful Brother Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Most Worshipful. Very much appreciate the summary of that. And now, brethren, our educational program this evening, we're going to talk specifically about William Pitt Tavern. Certainly, if you have not had an opportunity to visit the tavern, I would highly encourage you to do so. It is a gem that we have here in New Hampshire. And to talk more about that, I would like to reintroduce Right Worshipful Brother David Collins, who will then, following his part of the program, bring on Right Worshipful Brother Carl Olson. Right Worshipful Brother Collins.
Thank you, Brother Hotchkiss. Right Worshipful Brother Hotchkiss. Brethren, good evening. As Right Worshipful Brother Hotchkiss talked about, you've heard me talk about it many times. The William Pitt Tavern really is a gem of Freemasonry. It is the one, if not the only, at this point, we're not aware of others. We are the only jurisdiction in the United States that actually has possession of the building where our Grand Lodge was originally formed. And I will tell you, brethren, if you have not been down to the William Pitt Tavern right now, because of limitations at Strawberry Bank, it is currently not open, but when it is, I encourage you to make an effort to go down there and see that. Me, myself, it's very personal to me because I was actually raised as a Master Mason by my lodge in that building. But there's a wonderful amount of history. Myself, Brother Carl Olson, Right Worshipful Brother Carl Olson, Right Worshipful Brother Rod McDonald, we talk about the tavern a lot. So Right Worshipful Brother Olson and myself are actually going to do a little tag team presentation tonight on the William Pitt Tavern. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it over to him to talk about the early history, and I will talk a little bit later about with more modern history, why we actually were able to get back possession of that building and the partnership we have with Strawberry Bank. So Right Worshipful Brother Olson, if you'd like to take it away, and then you can turn it back over to me when you get to that point in your program.
Thank you, Right Worshipful. Yes, brethren, we do have an absolute treasure in the fact that we have the building where our Grand Lodge was started. In addition to it being the building where our Grand Lodge was started, it also is the building that St. John's Lodge met in for many years prior to the establishment of our Grand Lodge. So a lot of you are familiar with a lot of the facts, the numbers that go along with William Pitt Tavern. Just like to quickly review some of those, but then I'd like to talk a little bit more about the role that it played in our early Grand Lodge, specifically what it did and what it didn't do. So, brethren, we all have heard, if you've been down to William Pitt Tavern or if you've helped us out with the candlelight strolls or any of the events that we have down there, that the building was started in 1766 by John Stavers. Took him about 2 years to complete, and starting in about 1768 at the William Pitt Tavern, actually then the Earl of Halifax Tavern, St. John's Lodge began to meet. And then along came the American Revolution and the spirit of Americanism and colonialism that went with that, and because of some of Staver's perceived alliances, he renamed it the William Pitt Tavern because William Pitt was more friendly toward the U.S., the North American colonies' purposes than the Earl of Halifax was. So that was a move by him to show that he supported American independence. Then along in 1789, 5 brethren got together, a small meeting, and decided that it was time to establish a Grand Lodge for the state of New Hampshire. So in 1789, they established that Grand Lodge for the state of New Hampshire in that room. And out of all of the, I believe, 51 Masonic jurisdictions that exist in the United States, we're the only ones that have that claim over the room where we were founded. So that's really a valuable tie-in for us. Shortly after that, they went through all of the steps that they needed to go through in order to establish what that Grand Lodge was going to look like. And they established the basic rules and regulations of what Grand Lodge was. And if you think things are a little bit tough now, when they established that originally in 1789, they said Grand Lodge would meet quarterly. So if you think going twice a year in May and November is too much, they were going 4 times a year to visit Grand Lodge. Now, in talking about our Grand Lodge, it is obviously inextricably linked to William Pitt Tavern. That is where it was founded, and that is where it met. But for how long? What were some of those details there? That's what I'd like to talk a little bit more about today. That's sort of that missing piece, because we all say, yeah, they met there, they were established, and everybody can tell you exactly what date it was and point to that, those minutes that are on the wall of that first meeting that they held there, and can tell you in depth, we started meeting there. But then if you say, well, for how long? Well, then voices kind of just sort of trail off, and well, it was until sometime in the early 19th century. Well, I went back and I did some research to try and tighten up on that and find out exactly what and why and how long we did meet there. Well, I can tell you, we met there for a number of years because it operated as a tavern for a number of years. One of the things that I did find in my research that I was doing was that the William Pitt Tavern, because of some of Staver's leanings and things that he thought, tended to be a destination for foreign travelers. So we do know that in 1783, for a fact, that when he came back from the American Revolution after it had ended, that Marquis de Lafayette stayed at William Pitt Tavern. And he was actually in company. And one of the people that was in company with him that came along with him to Pitt Tavern then went on later to become the King of France. So we actually had a French noble stay probably on that second floor of that building, which is where our Masonic Museum is now, which is a claim that I don't think a lot of other Grand Lodges can make. So things continued on. Well, shortly before 1800, in the late 1890s, in a tragic accident, John Stavers, who owned the tavern, was killed. Well, his daughters then inherited the tavern from him, and they kind of split it up. And at that time, the tavern sort of lost its sheen and wasn't quite the wonderful meeting place that it had been in the past. So at that point, they started looking at the potential for other quarters. And those finally came along in 1805. In 1805, they actually entered into an agreement with St. John's Lodge, where our Grand Lodge and St. John's Lodge both moved into some space on the second and third floors of the New Hampshire Fire and Marine Insurance Company, ending our run at William Pitt Tavern in 1805. So we do have a hard date there of exactly when that transitioned. And it's really interesting because in the proceedings, it talks about the fact that St. John's Lodge opened lodge at William Pitt Tavern, or as they called it then, the old lodge room. And then they proceeded en masse to these new quarters where Grand Lodge opened in the new quarters and received that St. John's delegation. So there was actually a sort of a formal transfer there in 1805. During the time that they did meet at William Pitt Tavern from 89 to 1805, lots of things happened outside of William Pitt Tavern as well. Every year for St. John's Sunday, they would meet at a building called the Portsmouth Assembly Hall. And they would meet at this assembly hall, which, according to George Washington's description, was palatial beyond belief and the equal of anything in the country. And in our proceedings, you can actually read when Major General John Sullivan was installed as our most worshipful Grand Master. They describe in detail that ceremony and him and his officers proceeding through the tables that were set up, being greeted and heralded as the Grand Master by all of the lodges seated at all of these tables before he was officially installed and seated in the Grand Oriental chair. So a lot of the bigger meetings were held at other venues. And if you've ever been to that lodge room at William Pitt Tavern, you know that only so many bodies fit in there before things get really hot and uncomfortable. So they used other spaces as well. And at sometimes in those early years, they actually met at other people's houses when they might not meet at the tavern. I don't know if the space wasn't available that day or just what some of those details might have been, but they would occasionally move around. So we see a history there that there was some movement. There were some things that went on. It's really interesting in that entire run from our establishment in 1789 under Major General John Sullivan as our first Grand Master up through 1805 when we moved out of the building. Grand Lodge was presided over by no more than 4 Grand Masters, because Most Worshipful Hall Jackson served for 7 years until he died in office. Following him, another brother served a very brief term, but then we had Brother Thomas Thompson, and Thomas Thompson served a 7-year term. So that whole period was under very few Grand Masters. Our Grand Lodge met there a grand total of 50 times. So it was their predominant meeting room. So we do have all of that tie-in that we did meet there. We spent a lot of time there. We established that as our home. And as I said, we are inextricably tied to that. So after 1805, right after the turn of the 19th century, we see that building starting to decay. And so Grand Lodge seeking other quarters and seeking to move out. The building continued to decay and things changed in that whole greater Puddle Dock area. And if you talk to people who remember it from the days of their youth, you'll hear a much different story than what it is at Strawberry Bank. So later on, there was an opportunity for some involvement by Grand Lodge. And to talk about some of the work of those Grand Lodge committees and other folks later on from the mid-20th century onward, I'm going to turn it back over to Brother Collins.
Thank you, Brother Olson. So continuing the story, brethren. So let's move from 1805, let's move about 150 years down the road. As time went along, the building was essentially a tenement house. There are pictures that you can actually find online from the 20s that the building doesn't look too bad. But when you get up to like the early 60s, the building had an asbestos siding put on it. Wasn't very pretty, the pictures I've seen. However, on the 175th anniversary of the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire in 1964, the Grand Lodge got permission from whoever the building owners was at the time to put a brass plaque on that building. Now, the next time you go to the William Pitt Tavern, when you go to the entrance, and we always enter from the side rear of it, right before it, there's a little alcove, which is an exit for the restaurant. Go up in that alcove, and there's 3 brass plaques there. One of those brass plaques is the one that was on the building in 1964. And let me read to you what it says. This tablet is erected by the Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of the state of New Hampshire to mark the site of its foundation on July 8th, 1789. A really significant date to us, brethren. However, I'm also here to tell you that I've surmised, and I think I'm pretty correct on this looking at pictures of the time, that brass plaque, and there was another one placed by the Sons of the American Revolution about 50 years prior, were probably the 2 best things looking on that building. The building didn't look like much, brethren. So what happened is Strawberry Bank was originally developed to be essentially they were didn't want the area, they wanted to preserve the buildings. It wasn't the interpretive museum it was today, but what they really wanted to do was try to preserve the buildings and the history in the Puddle Dock area in Portsmouth near Prescott Park. So what they did, brethren, is time moves along, another decade goes by. And by the mid-70s, Strawberry Bank was starting to acquire buildings and remodel buildings. But as you know, old buildings, remodeling costs a lot of money, brethren. So what they did, they saw the Masons of New Hampshire had erected that plaque, and they thought, maybe we can approach them, maybe they'd like to go into a partnership. So in the mid to late 1970s, the Strawberry Bank approached the Grand Lodge in New Hampshire, and they asked if we would like to go into a partnership to completely restore the building. Well, wise brethren took on that task. And those brethren we have to give a lot of credit to, because they literally raised, brethren, millions of dollars. There was a committee put together of brethren around the state, and these brethren went around and started collecting funds. And they literally raised millions of dollars. And by about 1983-84, they had raised enough money to essentially, they had acquired the building that was the William Pitt Tavern building. They acquired the building. They essentially gutted the building right down to the frame structure and essentially remodeled the building back to the way it looked, architecturally wise, back to the way it looked in the colonial times. Now, brethren, you look at that building, and if you ever go in the William Pitt Tavern, there's a couple small photographs showing of that renovation. But I'm here to tell you, an old wooden building from the 1700s, how does that even stand today? Well, I'm here to tell you, brethren, there's a nice thing called structural steel, and there is in all the frame of the building up through the roof frame. I have been with Brother Olson, we've been up in the attic area, and there is the original beams of the building, of the roof beams that have structural steel that are strapped right according to them. So the building is very solid, and that's why we can feel very safe in that building. But brethren, at that time, between Strawberry Bank and ourselves, we spent in the 1980s dollars about $4.5 million to remodel that building. And the goal was, brethren, to get it back and open by the time the bicentennial of the Grand Lodge came around in 1989. So what happened was, originally, they were just going to put a small museum up there. They thought, we have the original building, let's put a museum. But a lot of the brethren started talking, and they thought from the Grand Master down, wouldn't it be wonderful if we actually had a lodge where brethren could come and do degree work and essentially hold lodge meetings? So that's where the William Pitt Tavern Lodge number 1789 was founded. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Brother Olson, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the modern history, taking it from 1989 forward. Brother Olson.
Thank you, Brother Collins. Bringing it forward actually a little earlier than that, William Pitt Tavern Lodge number 1789 was actually established, I found it in the proceedings today, by Most Worshipful John Calvin Martin in 1982. And in their initial membership drive, that lodge chartered over 2,000 members. Their goal was that they wanted 1,789 members for Lodge 1789. And they ended up with over 2,000 brethren at that point before they closed out the membership in the original chartering of the lodge. So there were that many charter members. And they established that special lodge, William Pitt Tavern Lodge, number 1789. And William Pitt Tavern Lodge, 1789, is presided over by our grand officers. So there are no elections. When you elect the Grand Line, you elect the officers that are going to rule over William Pitt Tavern Lodge. So they take their seats based on that. Now, moving that clock forward again, we get up to the year 2000. We had a relatively progressive past Grand Master, Jeremy Jason Sawyer, who said, we need forward-thinking programs. So he began a program called Challenge 2000. And there was another program that went with it called Compass. And I can tell you, one of the junior members whose name I saw on some of those committee reports is the guy that's sitting to, as I'm looking at it, my right on the screen. Most Worshipful Kenneth A. Clay was a member of some of those committees that were part of that Compass Vision 2000 program, that Challenge 2000 program that Most Worshipful Sawyer had. At that time, he reopened membership in William Pitt Tavern. And at that time, I can't find exact numbers on it. I believe they got somewhere above 300 additional members at that time. But then at the end of that Challenge 2000, they reclosed the membership. So there have been no new members since then. But brethren, when we talk about going down and doing degree work or having meetings at William Pitt Tavern, we talk about the fact that you don't need a dispensation because it's a consecrated lodge room. Well, how can it be a consecrated lodge room without a consecrated lodge meeting in it? Well, we have a lodge that meets there. That's William Pitt Tavern Lodge number 1789. And there actually is another sort of lodge that calls that lodge room home. And the sort of lodge that calls that Grand Room home is the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire, because the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire does not own the building in Manchester that we go and we have our annual and semi-annual communications at. That they're a guest in that room. They're guests of Washington Lodge number 61 in Manchester. So the lodge room that they have, that they own, is that third floor lodge room at William Pitt Tavern. So that's the home of our Grand Lodge, and that's the home of William Pitt Tavern Lodge number 1789. And on behalf of both of those organizations, we would absolutely love to have you come down and decide that you want to hold a meeting there. Obviously this is going to be easier once COVID goes away to go down and have those meetings there. But we fully encourage and fully welcome anybody that wants to come in and visit that room, to stand on the floor that potentially Washington stood on, because we know that Washington visited Portsmouth in 1789. And in fact, there's one collection of ramblings that was written in the mid 1800s that talks about the fact that possibly George Washington walked from the rooming house that he stayed in, which was right up the street, down and walked through the door of Pitt Tavern. Can't prove it for sure, but we know that Marquis de Lafayette stayed there. We know that a future king stayed there. We have artifacts in there that will allow you to connect with some of the earliest days in Masonry and with some of the most notable Masons that we've had in New Hampshire Masonry. So we can't encourage you strongly enough to learn more about the tavern. On behalf of myself, and I think I could even speak for Brother Collins, to say if you want to know more about the tavern, you want to know more about any of that, you'd like that as a program at your lodge, let us know. We'll come out and we'll talk in depth about any of the artifacts that we have, the room itself, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we have interaction with Masonic presidents. We have interactions with senators, with state representatives, et cetera, et cetera. And the story of New Hampshire history, Masonically, our Masonic history is tied to people like Lafayette, people like Washington, like other presidents, like Harry S. Truman. And the opportunity to share that is just amazing. So take advantage of that and be a part of the history of our Grand Lodge. And with that, and on behalf of Brother Collins, I thank you, Right Worshipful Hotchkiss, for the time that you've given us in the meeting, and we thank you, Most Worshipful, for inviting us to present here.
Well, thank you both for that wonderful program regarding William Pitt Tavern. And brethren, it truly is a gem that we have here in New Hampshire, and I would highly encourage you to visit the tavern as often as you can. And that actually concludes our general speaking programs this evening. However, we did have a question from Brother Tom Ladd regarding the Stage 1B protocol, which dealt specifically with collations. Is that going to change with the return of degrees that we just heard about? The short answer to that, Brother Ladd, is no. There will be no change in the dispensing of collations and how the food is handled as a result of adding degree work to the new protocol. So there will be no change there. Brethren, I would certainly like to thank all of our speakers this evening. I greatly appreciate all the time and effort you placed into presenting your programs and preparing for them. And one quick plug before I turn it over to the Grand Master for some closing comments, brethren. We are will be hosting, our Grand Lodge Education Committee will be hosting a Master Mason Education Seminar on Saturday, August 1st at Horse Chase Lodge in Pennacook from 9 a.m. until about 3 p.m. or so, give or take. Actually, registration will begin at 8 o'clock. So if you haven't registered, you feel free to do that. And just to give you a brief summary of some of the programs that will be discussed during the day, we'll talk a little bit about the why the seminar exists and what its purpose is. Most Worshipful Brother Clay will talk a little bit about Grand Lodge. And there'll be a discussion regarding the Constitution and the landmarks, an overview of Masonic history in general. There'll be a Masonic protocol discussion as well. And I think that's an important fact that, that we all need to be aware of and how we handle ourselves within the lodge room. There'll be discussion regarding Masonic ritual, and then there'll be some roundtable discussions following that. And then towards the end of the day, there'll be an open question and answer session. So hope that you may attend that. And there is a small registration fee. I believe it's $25. But for newly raised Master Masons, there is no fee. So I would certainly encourage you, if you haven't attended one of those before, even if you have, I always glean some new information whenever I get the opportunity to attend those, and I look forward to attending it that day as well. I don't see any other further questions. So at this time, Most Worshipful, I will turn it over to you for some closing comments.
Well, thank you very much, Right Worshipful Brother Hotchkiss. I want to thank you personally for putting together this evening's agenda. Fantastic job. I want to thank each of the speakers. Once again, a fabulous job. And certainly, Brother Busby, I want to thank you each and every time we host one of these. You do such a fantastic job of making sure that the tools are there. And that's demonstrated by the fact that we have a good number of members who are with us here this evening. Brethren far and wide, I want you to know, as your Grand Master, that I am so very proud of you. There are so many challenges in the world, so many reasons for us to get down. And yet, you are a beacon of light and a beacon of hope. Each time I see you, whether it's on a session such as this, or whether it's in a lodge room, you're smiling, you're positive, and you're energetic. And I think it's because you truly, truly love your Freemasonry, just as we all do. Brethren, the gift of life is precious. It's something that we shouldn't take lightly. It was a difficult week from our standpoint. I personally lost a senior DeMolay this week that I grew up with, who lived in Loudon, just an outstanding member of the community from the moment he was a teenager until this week. And I'm going to miss him dearly. We also lost a member of the 7th District who had a very big impact, not only the lodges in that district, but throughout all of Freemasonry in New Hampshire. He will be sorely missed. But brethren, there's also those who have lost loved ones. There's a member of the 8th District who lost a significant family member this week. There's an awful lot of that sort of thing going on, unfortunately, and yet, despite all of these speed bumps, Freemasonry notwithstanding, still survives. Brethren, I'll remind you once again of my 4 pillars. Make sure that you're putting together programs that retain your members, that are fun and enjoyable to attend. Ritualistic excellence. We have a fantastic Grand Lecturer, Deputy Grand Lecturer, and a series of District Deputy Grand Lecturers that know the Masonry, know the ritual of our Masonry as well as anyone in this state. And I would encourage you, if you're ever at a point where you want to brush up on some of your ritual, reach out to these brethren. They are a wealth of knowledge. Masonic education under the leadership of our Grand Education Officer and Deputy Grand Education Officer, and each of our district Deputy Grand Education Officers. Once again, they are a wealth of information, and I would highly encourage you to take you up on the offer of Right Worshipful Brother Hotchkiss to stop by Horace Chase Lodge this weekend and participate in the Master Mason Seminar. I think you'll find it to be truly a valuable part of your time. And it certainly would behoove me to call upon our district deputy grand masters who represent me throughout this grand jurisdiction in a very admirable and professional way. And lastly, my last pillar is that of communication. And I think our communications committee, brothers Newberry and Busby and Flynn, do a fantastic job, whether it's newsletters or Q&As, the website, and now you're hearing about their latest innovation, a podcast that they're going to start offering later this year. Communication's what it's all about, brethren. You need to make sure that you're staying connected and understanding what is happening, and I appreciate everything they do for that. So, brethren, I will conclude with this. Be here because you want to be, not because you have to be. Brethren, there are a bunch of you that are on here tonight because you want to be, and I thank you for that. Right Worshipful Brother Hotchkiss, thank you for the time this evening.
Thank you, Right Worshipful. Most Worshipful. Get caught up in all the Right Worshipfuls we're talking about this evening. Brethren, that does conclude the 6th installment of the Grandmaster's Q&A, and we greatly appreciate your time this evening. We do apologize once again for the initial technical difficulties, but we were able to overcome those, and I hope you received a lot of valuable information. So thank you again for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you in the near future.